Yeah, it's really incredible when you think about it. I mean, there were so many red flags here, and there were so many opportunities to intervene and to remove the kids from the home when it was obviously an unsanitary, unsafe environment, but they didn't do it.
New details.
Ohio's Gallia County Children's Services had a file on the Cyders family years before 16 kids were pulled out of a house that investigators are now calling a house of horrors, bruises, roaches, gnats. A 5-year-old who couldn't speak in full sentences. Caseworkers saw all of it, wrote it all down, and closed the case anyway. Twice. I'm going to walk you through exactly what's in those records, because once you see the paper trail, you're going to ask the same question I did. How does a system with this much documented warning still let it get this far? Let's start with the charges, because they're serious. Cyders Jr. and Elizabeth Cyders have been indicted by a Vinton County grand jury on sexual battery and unlawful sexual conduct with a minor.
For nearly 2 months, I've been telling you that children's services workers in Gallia County had contact with Cyders Jr. and Elizabeth Cyders and their children before they ever moved to Vinton County. Well, now we're finally getting to see the records that detail what caseworkers found and why even doctors and school administrators were so concerned. We obtained the records right after Gary Jr. and Elizabeth were indicted by a grand jury in Vinton County on sexual battery and unlawful.
Those charges involve a family member outside their own children, but the couple was also hit with a mix of felony and misdemeanor child endangering counts tied to the 16 kids discovered inside their home on Omar Street this past summer. When officers first went in, they were looking at 16 separate felony counts of child endangering, every single one classified as a second-degree felony.
Members, but Gary and Elizabeth were also indicted on a mix of felony and misdemeanor counts of child endangering for their 16 children found in that house on Omar Street on June 30th. When they were first arrested, Gary Jr. and Elizabeth had actually faced 16 felony counts of child endangering. Those were all felonies in the second degree. But the concern...
That's not a slap on the wrist. That's the kind of charge sheet that tells you investigators believed every child in that house was in danger, not just one or two. But here's the part that should make you furious. This isn't new information to the system. It goes back to 2020 when the Cyders had 9 children and were living one county over in Gallia. And the case didn't start because a neighbor called it in or because police showed up on a welfare check. It started because a school flagged them.
Gary and Elizabeth's children actually goes back years to 2020. At that time, they had 9 children and lived in neighboring Gallia County. Children's Services in Gallia County started investigating the Cyders because records show the online school where they were enrolled reported them. At that
In January
time,
of 2020, Gallia County opened an investigation after Ohio Virtual Academy reported a 7-year-old Cyders child enrolled with no prior schooling record at all, presenting with serious developmental delays and unable to speak in complete sentences. No pediatrician had ever evaluated her.
At that time, the family was living in this house on Garfield Avenue in Gallipolis. Children's Services considered the children neglected. A juvenile court record reads, this agency initiated an investigation on January 15, 2020, regarding a Cyders child whose name is redacted. The child was 7 years old. It was reported the child was enrolled in Ohio Virtual Academy, OVA, in late fall of 2019, but was entered with no prior schooling, but presented significant developmental delays, an inability to speak in complete sentences or initiate conversation. It was reported that the child has not been to a pediatrician for evaluation.
Now, here's a legal term worth defining, because you'll hear it a lot in cases like this educational neglect. That's when a parent or guardian fails to provide a child with legally required schooling, and it's treated as a form of child neglect in most states, including Ohio. This case had it in writing from day one, and it wasn't just one child. A 13-year-old was enrolled and never logged a single day of coursework before being formally withdrawn. Multiple children were assessed as performing far below grade level. One child...
And there were concerns about the other Cyders children. The caseworker wrote, at the beginning of this agency's investigation, concerns about another child, age 13, not completing school through the OVA was raised due to her being enrolled on January 6, 2020. But as of February 4th, 2020, she had not logged into the account to complete schoolwork. On February 4th, 2020, she was officially withdrawn from the OVA. OVA considered the child to never have started based on no records being provided, except those collected during enrollment. After further investigation, it was determined that the child was enrolled in Gallia Digital Academy program on December 12, 2019, but no completion of schoolwork can be provided. The OVA program stated that the Cyders family is not an appropriate fit for their program and believes that a traditional brick and mortar school would be in the best interest of the children. The social worker wrote that the concerns were about all of the Cyders
Evaluated at
children.
around 12 years old, was found to be a non-reader. She knew a little over half her lowercase letters, most of her uppercase letters, and 0 letter sounds. The only word she recognized on a primer reading test
not
was
Gary Jr. and Elizabeth. All of the children who were enrolled in online school were performing at incredibly low levels academically because they were barely logging on to online school, according to the caseworker. The caseworker wrote, "The school has since raised concerns regarding the children age 12, age 11, and age 9 being low academically and performing below grade level expectations. One child is at a 40% attendance level out of 100% and considered off track in the following subjects: math, literature, Mark 12, social studies, history, and science. The oldest child was given an assessment on January 19th, 2020 by her teacher, who found that she is a non-reader. The child knows 14 out of 26 lowercase letters, 21 out of 26 uppercase letters, and 0 out of 26 letter sounds, and the only pre-primer word one knew was and. In addition to struggling with the alphabet, one child can count 1 through 12 before making mistakes. On February 28th, 2020, it was reported that the child was given an assessment that found she had not made any academic progress within the last 10 weeks.
Another child could count to 12 before losing track. 10 weeks after intervention began, one child had made no academic progress whatsoever. Now pay attention to who was actually engaging with the school during all this, because it wasn't Gary or Elizabeth. It was the paternal grandmother, Christina Cyders.
And the person who was having contact with the school about the children, it wasn't the parents. Guess who it was? It was Grandma Christina Cyders. She was the one in touch with the school about the children, not Gary Jr.
She's the one on record speaking with school officials about the children falling behind. At one point, she confirmed to the caseworker that the concerns were legitimate. Then, later, she walked that statement back.
For evaluation of any medical and or developmental delays. During the initiation of the case, Christina Cyders, the paternal grandmother, stated that the above accusations were true.
Sit with that for a second. A grandmother essentially validated the family's failures to a state investigator and then retracted it. That's not a neutral detail. That's a pattern investigators call enabling. When someone close to the family minimizes or reverses damaging information to protect the parents, even at the expense of the kids. So what did Gallia County do with all of this?
Their hygiene was poor, and they always wore the same clothes. The caseworker wrote, Elizabeth Cyders, the mother, and Gary Cyders, the second, father, are non-compliant with following the recommendations of the school. Medical examinations, physiological examinations, physical examinations, speech therapy, vision/hearing screenings, and participation in intervention programs. Based on interactions with the family, and specifically the children, there are concerns that all of the children need to be assessed for delays, developmental disabilities, and other educational needs. Additionally, it appears the parent/caretakers are either unwilling to or are not capable of assuring the children's well-being when it comes to educational, developmental, and mental health needs.
They opened a case. They wrote up detailed findings. A shelter care hearing was held. That's the hearing where a judge decides whether a child stays with their parents or goes into protective custody.
A shelter care hearing was held later that month, and that's where a court determines whether children should remain with their parents or be placed in a shelter. That means with foster care. After the hearing, the court found, as stipulated to by the parents, there are reasonable grounds to believe that the child is in danger from her surroundings and that protective supervision of the child is necessary to prevent the child's physical and or emotional harm. The child is in the care and custody of her parents, Gary Cyders II and Elizabeth Cyders.
And the court found there were, quote, reasonable grounds to believe the child was in danger from her surroundings. And then the ruling the children stay in the home under something called protective supervision, meaning a caseworker is supposed to make unannounced visits and confirm the family is following a court-ordered plan. By October 2020, the judge decided the family had made reasonable progress. Case closed, no removal, no lasting consequence.
With their parents. By October 2020, the judge presiding over the case found that reasonable efforts had been made to keep the children from being removed from their parents. And the case, it was closed. The court's order states, the court further finds that it is in the best interest of the child to remain in the custody of her parents, the protective supervision be terminated, and that this case be closed. It is therefore ordered that the child remain in the custody of Elizabeth and Gary Lee Cyders Jr. It is further ordered that protective supervision be terminated. It is further ordered that this case be closed. That's it.
2 months later, the family moved into a new house and a brand new case opened. This time it wasn't about school, it was about lead poisoning. 4 of the children were found to have elevated lead levels, a condition that can cause permanent developmental damage in kids.
In December of that same year, just 2 months later, the Cyders and their 9 children had moved into the house on Honeysuckle in Cheshire. We've shown it to you before. And Children's Services opened a new case, this time over concerns that 4 of the children had high levels of lead in their systems. Caseworker Aaron Cantor wrote, "There were concerns that parents, Elizabeth and Gary, were not completing medical follow-ups. The medical staff had reported that high levels of lead can lead to developmental delays. During the initiation on December 8th, 2020, caseworker Cantor was denied access to the home and asked to come back because the children were sleeping. There were a number of red flags in caseworker Aaron Cantor's affidavit. She was denied access to the children at times, and the conditions in the home were disgusting."
Caseworker Aaron Cantor tried to enter the home in December 2020 and was turned away at the door, told the children were sleeping. When she finally got inside, she documented a heavy infestation of roaches, flies, and gnats. The family's own pediatrician told the state the children had a persistent odor, poor dental condition, and that one child, nearly 5 years old, still could not speak clearly enough to be evaluated normally.
Cantor wrote, "At the beginning of this agency's investigation, caseworker Cantor was allowed access into the home on December 9th, 2020, but access to the children was denied. While in the home, concerns were raised due to a high population of roaches, flies, and gnats. After further investigation, the family has now become compliant with medical appointments, but medical staff are concerned that the family will stop coming to appointments once the case is closed, as this happened the last time the family had an open case. The children's medical provider and caseworker Cantor are in contact often regarding the well-being of the children. The physician has stated the children have an odor, but seem to be in good health. The physician is concerned about teeth as they are not in good condition. Caseworker Cantor is also worried about another child's speech as she is almost 5 years old and cannot speak any clear language. Caseworker Cantor would like the child to have a speech evaluation to address this concern." Caseworker Cantor.
Cantor was denied access to the upstairs of the home entirely, and on one of the children she was allowed to see, she documented something specific: circular, linear bruising on the back of a child's thigh, the kind of bruising pattern investigators are trained to flag as a possible sign of physical abuse, not accidental injury.
One red flag that stood out to me was there was a 5-year-old girl, and she was not speaking well. And there was something they saw, the caseworker Cantor saw on the little girl, and it was like bruising on the back of her thigh. And there was a huge red flag, Dr. Bober, because Cantor goes to the house, this caseworker, and they won't let her up to the top floor of the house, which seems insane to me, because if you're a caseworker, you're like, I'm going up to the top floor of the house.
Yeah, I'm going anywhere I need to go. Right.
Yeah, I'm going in and I'm going up. And so they said when she questioned Gary and Elizabeth about the bruising on the back of the thigh of this child, they got very agitated and they wouldn't talk about it. So then they're like suspecting abuse, actual physical abuse.
Right. So it's like, how much more do you need? You know, between the unsafe, unsanitary conditions, the lead in the bloodstream, potential signs of abuse. I mean, there were red flags all over it. So it's hard to imagine that they did everything they needed to do. Their reaction was very underwhelming and I think potentially unsafe.
When she asked Gary and Elizabeth about it directly, they became agitated and claimed they had no idea how it got there.
Supervision of the children. This time, she saw potential signs of physical abuse that couldn't be explained. Cantor wrote, though the concerns of medical neglect have been addressed and resolved, the refusal to access the upstairs of the home and the children raises new concerns due to there being circular linear bruising on the back of one child's thigh and the lack of being able to see the children. Caseworker Cantor now has concerns of possible abuse and/or severe neglect. Caseworker Cantor also saw insect bites on another child's arms along with scratches. The child also was tugging her ear and scratching her head profusely. The parents were questioned regarding the bruising. They became agitated and stated they were unaware of any bruising. The parents also stated that the child has one cavity on her baby tooth and are not concerned about it. Caseworker Cantor has noticed the parents are always in the same clothing and do not have consistent hygiene.
Despite bruising consistent with abuse, an active lead poisoning case, an insect infestation, and a locked-off second floor, Gallia County Job and Family Services did not seek custody. They requested protective supervision again, even after describing the parents as uncooperative in their own paperwork. By June 2021, the court found the family had completed its case plan. The case was closed. Again, that fall, the children were supposed to enroll at a local elementary school. They never showed up. The family had vanished from the county's radar completely, and because there's no unified tracking system for open child welfare cases the way there is for a criminal warrant, the Cyders simply crossed a county line and started over with nobody following them.
Hygiene, nor do the children. Despite all of this, Gallia County Job and Family Services did not seek custody of the children. The agency requested protective supervision, even though Gary Jr. and Elizabeth were described as uncooperative. By June 2021, the court found the caseworker had helped Gary Jr. and Elizabeth complete their case plan, and the court determined it was in the best interest of the children to remain with their parents. The case was closed. Later that year, the children were supposed to attend Ataville Elementary School, but guess what? They didn't show up. The Cyders had disappeared.
Forensic psychiatrist Dr. Daniel Bober, who's been tracking this case from the beginning, put it about as plainly as you can. He said, "What's most disturbing is the foreseeability. Authorities were already in the home, already writing down red flags, and the children were left there anyway." He pointed to the sheer caseload and staffing problems that plague agencies like this one, but he stopped short of calling that an excuse.
What that contact was. In 2020, the school district went to Children's Services and said, these kids are not logging on to school and their grades are awful. And there was really a serious concern that they were falling behind.
It's really disturbing when you consider that there was an element of foreseeability here. The authorities were actually involved and they were actually looking at the case. But it seems that in every case, the children were left in the home. There was some kind of parenting or case plan that was initiated. Supposedly, the parents made some progress on that plan. And then eventually the supervision was called off and the case was closed. And I know in these types of cases, we always try to keep the kids with the family, but it seems like there were definitely some red flags. And I don't know how much of a deep dive these caseworkers did, but it seems like something was really missed. And we know that these agencies very often have huge caseloads with people who are poorly trained, underpaid, undermotivated. And then, of course, there are other ones that do a tremendous job. So I guess we just really don't know exactly what they saw or how much effort was made into really figuring out what was going on.
When you have documented bruising, documented neglect, documented enabling by a family member.
So you see some balls potentially dropped here by Children's Services in Gallia County.
That's the way it looks. You know, I didn't see what the caseworkers saw. I didn't fill out those reports. I don't have the information that they had. But when you look at this from an outsider's perspective, it seems like there were many opportunities here to intervene and prevent this tragedy from occurring. And it seems like a lot of balls were dropped from the outside.
And a caseworker being physically blocked from parts of the house, we didn't have enough information, stops being a credible explanation. And that raises the question nobody wants to say out loud, but everybody's thinking, if Gallia County had pulled these kids in 2020 or 2021, would the sexual battery charges Gary and Elizabeth are now facing have ever happened at all? We can't know for sure. But it's not a stretch to ask it. Here's where things stand now. The 16 children are in therapeutic foster care, and the county is pursuing permanent custody. A legal standard that requires clear and convincing evidence that returning children to their parents is not safe, essentially terminating parental rights for good. If that happens, this family does not get these kids back, ever.
And now those children are in protective custody. They are in therapeutic foster care. And Dr. Bober, the county is seeking permanent custody of these children, which means the Cyders, and especially with the legal jeopardy they're in, if the county gets permanent custody of these children, the Cyders will never get them back.
And, you know, given everything that's happened, it shows you what a high bar they need to terminate those parental rights. You know, even after everything that's happened, finally, you know, these kids will not go back to that home. And I guess this is what needed to happen. But it seems like something could have been done a lot sooner with earlier intervention. It seems like there would have been a better outcome.
And I hate to make this leap, but it makes you wonder too, if there had been something more done, would the alleged sexual abuse of the other child maybe not have happened?
Yeah, we can only speculate, but it's definitely a question that would come into my mind as well.
It shouldn't have taken this much documented harm to get there, and that's the real failure at the center of this story. Not one bad decision, but a system that had years of warning and chose supervision over protection every single time.